coming. And I'd like to also appreciate the Chief of Defense Staff for this honor to make this presentation. I have always believed that training is very critical to our effectiveness in whatever field. If you do not train, of course, the outcome of your operational engagement will show in the negative. So it's in this regard that I believe that this training engagement is very, very crucial. I have been tasked to speak on innovative training approaches to mitigate emerging security challenges in Nigeria, the armed forces of Nigeria in perspective. I am particularly delighted to see the Honorable Minister listen to this keynote address. I'm also delighted that the service chiefs have sent representatives. And I'm hoping that arising from some of the experiences that we've had, the thoughts that were put together will be viewed in the right context and with the right frame of mind. And so, by way of introduction, in the rapidly evolving world, the ability to adapt to unforeseen challenges is not just a necessity, but a critical aspect of survival and success. This truth resonates profoundly within the context of national events, where the ability to pivot in response to shifting security threats can determine a nation's stability and future. Military forces across the globe are tasked with not only maintaining peace, but also preparing for conflicts that may arise unexpectedly. And I think what is happening currently across the Middle East is important. As the nature of warfare continues to evolve, armed forces must enhance their capabilities to tackle these new challenges effectively. Central to this endeavor is the concept of evolving military training methods. Traditional training models, while important, must be continuously updated to reflect the latest technological advancements, strategic paradigms, and nature of contemporary threats. Thus, to stay ahead of these challenges, the military must adopt more dynamic, flexible, and forward-looking thinking approaches, ultimately leading to the need for innovative training. Innovative training approaches refers to the incorporation of modern, forward-looking methodologies that leverage the latest technological advancements, new operational strategies, and evolving defense paradigms to enhance the effectiveness of military personnel. These approaches go beyond traditional classroom instruction, embracing immersive learning experiences, simulations and real-time scenario-based exercises that mirror the unpredictability of modern warfare. By utilizing cutting-edge technologies such as virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and advanced recording systems in training programs, soldiers can prepare to engage in complex, multifaceted operations with high degree of proficiency and confidence. The goal of these innovative approaches is not only to improve the technological skills of military personnel, but also to foster critical thinking, adaptive leadership, interactions for my online platform. Sorry about that. The goal, I take that again. The goal of these innovative approaches is not only to improve the technical skills of military personnel, but also to foster critical thinking, adaptive leadership, and situational awareness in environments that closely replicate real-world challenges. In doing so, Military forces are equipped with personnel capable of responding to the unexpected with strict precision and resilience, which is essential when addressing the demands of emerging security challenges. Emerging security challenges refer to the new and evolving threats that nations face, many of which arise from global interconnectivity, technological advancements, and the shifting nature of conflict. These threats include cyber warfare, terrorism, asymmetric warfare, and environmental threats that disrupt traditional defense strategies. Unlike conventional military conflicts, these emerging challenges require adaptive, non-linear responses which complicate standard military operations. Such challenges are unpredictable, evolving rapidly in nature, and often exploit vulnerabilities in traditional defense mechanisms. In Nigeria, the increasing frequency of insurgency, cyber attacks, and terrorism demands a more strategic, innovative approach to training military personnel. As these emerging security challenges intensify, the need for innovative training approaches becomes very paramount. Without the ability to continuously evolve and adapt their training methods, the armed forces risk falling behind in the battle to effectively safeguard national security and counter these growing threats. In recent years, India has faced increasing complex security challenges, notably in the aftermath of the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, which exposed serious gaps in coordination, preparedness, and urban counterterrorism capabilities. In response, the Indian government initiated a series of innovative training to modernize its security forces, beginning notably around the year 2010, with establishment of special counterterrorism training centers like the National Counterterrorism Center and the expansion of the National Security Guard training curriculum. These reforms were aimed at enhancing rapid response, urban warfare, cyber threat mitigation, and intelligence-driven policing. Notably, the Greyhound unit in Telangana has become a model for counterterrorism training, integrating real-time simulation, drone surveillance, and jungle warfare techniques to combat all the threats that they face. Additionally, the Indian Army launched the integrated theater commands and revamped officer training through virtual reality simulations and cyber warfare models to reflect the hybrid nature of modern threats. These innovations are driven by the need to prepare personnel for both conventional and non-conventional warfare, recognizing that emerging threats such as drone attacks, cyber intrusions, radicalization via digital platforms require adaptive, technology-led training paradigms, amongst others. Consequently, India's strategic shift in security training underscores a broader commitment to operational readiness in a rapidly evolving threat landscape. Following the 2011 Arab Spring and subsequent rise in terrorism, particularly from the Sinai-based group of the Asbe, otherwise known as the ISIS, Egypt faced significant security threats that exposed limitations in traditional military training. In response, Egypt began to adopt innovative training approaches. From 2014 onwards, focusing on asymmetric warfare, urban combat, and counter-IED strategies. The establishment of the Egyptian Counterterrorism School in 2017 was a pivotal step towards institutionalizing specialized training for elite forces, with support from international partners including France and Russia. Training was updated to incorporate modern technologies like unmanned aerial systems, surveillance drones, and as well as virtual combat simulators to prepare for non-conventional threats. Additionally, India has collaborated with Interpol and UNODC to build cyber crime investigation capacity and prevent online radicalization, acknowledging the digital dimensions of modern extremism. These innovative reforms reflect Egypt's recognition that contemporary security threats require highly adaptive, intelligence-driven, and technology-enhanced training solutions to maintain stability across volatile regions like the North Sinai. In Nigeria, in 2009, following the surge of Boko Haram insurgency and other asymmetric threats, the armed forces of Nigeria initiated innovative training approaches to enhance operational effectiveness in combating emerging security challenges. By 2014, these efforts had expanded with the establishment of the Nigerian Army Special Operations Command and the upgrade of the Martin Luther Aguirre International Leadership and Peacekeeping Center, which incorporated modules on counterinsurgency, civil military operations, psychological warfare, and joint interagency collaboration. Equally, the Nigerian Air Force recognized the curricula in their curriculum of the Air Force Institute of Technology to incorporate training modules that synchronize with the aspirations to tackle modern threats. Indeed, in the same vein, the Nigerian Navy tinkered with training and doctrine command in sympathy with the current demands of maritime operations. Furthermore, collaborative engagements with foreign partners such as the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany introduce advanced capabilities including tactical drone usage, intelligence-based targeting, battlefield medical support, as well as air-ground integration training. Despite these advances, the lack of indigenous technological capacity to sustain modern training tools remain a serious concern, undermining innovative training approaches by the armed forces to mitigate emerging security challenges. The framework and available infrastructure for training remain an issue for deep concern. These problems represent institutional constraints that continue to hinder the depth and sustainability of Nigeria's security training innovations. And I think this is where I'm glad and of course delighted that the Minister of Defense is here. This brings me to the purpose of this paper, which is to profess strategies to innovative training approaches by the armed forces of Nigeria to mitigate emerging security challenges. The paper will briefly examine the relationship between innovative training approaches and emerging security challenges, take an overview of existing training frameworks in the armed forces, and touch on the challenges undermining training. Thereafter, the presentation will highlight prospects for improving innovative training before providing strategies to enhance innovative training approaches in the armed forces. And that, of course, leads me to the aim, which is to examine innovative training approaches to mitigate emerging security challenges in Nigeria with a view to making recommendations. Now, I start with the relationship. Can I have a glass of water, please? Now, relationship between innovative training approaches and emerging security challenges. The Center for Strategic and International Studies defines innovative training approaches as the application of cutting-edge technologies, scenario-based learning, and interdisciplinary collaboration in the development of agile, adaptive, and resilient military forces capable of addressing both conventional and unconventional threats. The definition highlights the integration of simulation, scenario-based planning, and hybrid threat preparedness, all essential in the Nigerian context. The attributes of innovative training approaches include a massive simulation, digital learning platforms, real-time battlefield analytics, multi-domain training scenarios, and interagency collaboration. Conversely, emerging security challenges are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They are typified by non-traditional threats such as terrorism, cyber attacks, asymmetric warfare, and hybrid conflicts. Within the local environment, banditry, kidnapping, cybercrimes, transnational crimes, drug and human trafficking, organ harvesting, mining-related crimes, amongst others, are manifest. Innovative training, therefore, helps equip forces with adaptive tactics, enhance situational awareness, and optimize decision-making under volatile and uncertain conditions. Without innovative training, military personnel lack the cognitive flexibility, technical skills, and doctrinal support to respond effectively to complex threats. This results in reduced operational efficiency, increased vulnerability to enemy tactics, and diminished national defense capability. Therefore, there is a positive and significant relationship between innovative training approaches and the ability of our forces to manage and mitigate emerging security challenges. Now, overview of existing training frameworks in the armed forces. And I think this is quite critical I'm not seeing any member from the National Assembly that is here, but I think if they were here, this portion of this presentation will be very relevant to them. I think that it might be necessary for us to see a way to broaden the participation, maybe for us in the future, but more important to have the context of this part of the presentation made available to them. Now, military training techniques have significantly evolved over the years to align with technological advancement and strategic needs. Historically, training methods have transitioned from traditional reliance on physical conditioning and drills to incorporating cutting-edge technologies and innovative approaches necessary for modern war scenarios. Since the establishment of Nigeria's Ministry of Defense in 1958, military training has evolved from colonial-era conventional tactics to more dynamic, asymmetric approaches. The evolution of the armed forces inflicted a framework for its organization and training. The Nigerian Army formed the nucleus of the armed forces owing to its numerical strength and, of course, age and development. The formative years of the Nigerian Navy and the Nigerian Air Force could only reinforce the strength of the Army before the employment of the armed forces in the prosecution of the Civil War. Therefore, the services continue to develop their capacities as they deemed appropriate. In this regard, single service operational objectives drove the development of the services. The political development equally impacted the growth of the armed forces from the joint concept perspective. This status prevailed until the combat effectiveness of the armed forces were tested during the ECOMOG operations. Afterwards, the political scenarios did not allow for the prioritization of the joint force development of the armed forces until the current internal security challenges, which now necessitates a rating of the existing structure with particular reference to training development. A major turning point occurred in 2009 with the escalation of the Boko Haram insurgency, which exposed the limitations of the traditional combat methods. This led the armed forces of Nigeria to adopt counterinsurgency training, of course, as well as other modular joint operations and simulation-based exercises. Notable reforms included the creation of the Nigerian Army Special Operations Command, as earlier mentioned in 2014, as well as the restructure of the Martin Luther Agwai Peacekeeping Center. Equally, strategic partnership with US Africa, BMAT, which is now BDS, and GIZ enabled Nigeria to build limited capacity in drone tactics, cyber awareness, and interagency operations. Now, the existing framework for training of armed forces in Nigeria, armed forces of Nigeria, lie with the services, Army, Navy, and the Air Force. This, of course, is the right thing to do and should be sustained. However, in the light of the lessons that we have learned so far, the training priorities should be harmonized and coordinated by the defense headquarters. And I'm glad that this is holding, and of course, it's been holding, but I think there has to be an expansion in this regard, which forms the basis for this presentation. Now, services headquarters can no longer afford to continue to determine what they should train on. The Defense Headquarters Department of Operations should be a monitor of the services to ensure compliance of training standards specified by the Defense Headquarters. The common user training establishments, such as the Nigerian Defense Academy, the Nigerian Defense College, should remain under the direct supervision of the Defense Headquarters. In order to monitor compliance, joint field and simulation exercises should be constant, with periodic training meetings that should be held. Even though the current operational engagements are daunting, there must be a way to achieve this important goal. Services headquarters should lessen their control on operations and focus more on preparation of forces for operational deployment through focused training. And I think this is quite important, which I believe that CDS should engage the service chief to understand that they remain principal trainers and administrators, of course, of the services, principal trainers for deployment operations, because no longer, I'm glad that the address of the guest of honor also amplified the need for jointness. And so services should focus more on preparing troops for deployment, and where the Defense Headquarters takes charge with the control of those operations. And so the meeting of minds of the troops that have been prepared by the services through joint exercises. They cannot harmonize, and then of course before deployment into the fields. Now, what are the challenges? I'll try to run through them. Challenges undermining innovative training in the armed forces. The challenges undermining innovative training approaches of the armed forces include fragmented strategic responsibility for training, low manpower to innovation ratio, limited budgetary allocation for military training development, and underdeveloped indigenous technical base. Now, I'll take them one after the other. First, fragmented strategic responsibility for training. The challenge of fragmented strategic responsibility for training development stems from the uncoordinated political oversight on military matters. This is not to underplay the role of the defense sector, but then just to tell you what our evolution has been with respect to training. So the defense sector has, the Ministry of Defense has been a little bit detached, and not just the MOD, but equally all other higher strategic leadership in this regard. I am trying to say here that there must be greater attention that should be paid on issues of training of the armed forces by both the Ministry of Defense and of course higher levels, including National Assembly. It's not just to visit or to receive briefs, but to be properly seized of the nuances of involvement in training and training matters. So this is precisely what this seeks to achieve. So countries like the US integrate congressional defense oversight, Department of Defense policy frameworks, and service level innovation mandates. This ensures that funding for training is matched with operational doctrine and strategic imperatives. However, in Nigeria, disjointed planning leads to misaligned priorities, and I think you also mentioned it in the Foreign Minister. There is no consolidated national training doctrine linking strategic needs with infrastructure design and budget execution. So yes, there is an envelope. That envelope perhaps will just only be is sufficient for an aspect of the training, and yet that envelope covers all aspects of both training and operations, which in my view something has to be done. But then if the political arm of the armed forces as it were is infused in the process, then they'll be able to understand that what has been made, what has been provided in the budget will not take care of this. This is exactly what I'm trying to. Next, of course, is low manpower to innovation ratio. The challenge that compounds Nigeria's weak technical capacity is the low manpower to innovation ratio in each training ecosystem. In high-performing military systems, a balance is maintained between advanced training tools and qualified instructional personnel. South Korea, for example, trains over 1,200 cyber security cadets annually and deploys over 300 artificial intelligence certified instructors across its training units. In contrast, Nigeria suffers a shortage of trainers proficient in emerging domains such as cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and asymmetric operations. Many instructors rely on outdated knowledge and lack exposure to contemporary training innovations. The consequence is a poor implementation of even the limited technological tools that we have available. Additionally, the inadequate number of subject matter experts result in suboptimal training outcomes, delayed training cycles, and low troop adaptability. The combination of technical limitations and insufficient qualified manpower limits Nigeria's capacity to transition into a digitally competent and operationally agile military force. Now, budget allocation for military training. Now, this links up, of course, to the strategic oversight which I talked earlier. In ideal circumstances, sufficient funding enables the seamless integration of emerging training innovations like virtual reality, simulation-based combat scenarios, and autonomous systems, all of which are essential to counter evolving threats. Budgetary allocations for military training development refers to the consistent and strategic funding required to design, build and sustain training infrastructures such as tactical ranges, cyber warfare centers, and artificial intelligence-based simulators. In the Nigerian context, although some progress has been made through the establishment of specialized institutions like the Nigerian Army Simulation and Peacekeeping Centers that I referred to, funding limitations have hindered the modernization of these facilities. There is also a mismatch between the procurement of high-end training equipment and the technical manpower required to utilize them effectively, often resulting in the underutilization or redundancy, if you like. This challenge is not unique to Nigeria. For instance, Indonesia faced prolonged underinvestment in military training infrastructure between 2000 and 2010, allocating less than 1% of its GDP to defense. However, the launch of the Minimum Essential Force program in 2010 saw a greater increase in defense spending to over 1.2% of its GDP by the year 2020, leading to the development of localized combat simulation platforms and joint tactical training environments. The success of Indonesia's approach underscores the strategic imperative of aligning the fiscal priorities with operational needs, especially in fostering homegrown training innovations supported by well-trained manpower and sustainable infrastructure. In contrast, Nigeria's defense budget, although increasingly marginally by an average of 7% annually between 2010 and 2020, has not translated into meaningful capital investment in training infrastructure and capacity development. And this is exactly what the point we're making. That there has to be, even when there is an increase in budgetary allocation, but the translation must be properly measured such that the outcomes meet the realities. Now, the procurement, the armed forces continue to rely on outdated training methodologies that offer limited experiential learning. And where models exist, they are constrained by inadequate technical expertise and fragmented training. The procurement of foreign military equipment often lacks a synchronized plan for maintenance, adaptation to local context, or integration into broader military strategic objectives. Furthermore, there is a limited investment in building the required manpower to operate sophisticated systems, which further diminishes the impact of such procurements. These systemic inefficiencies are compounded by inconsistent political prioritization of training development and a lack of coordinated oversight, which I touched on earlier on, across defense ministries and services. As a result, the imperative of continuous training as a force multiplier remains underappreciated. The transformation of Nigeria's military training landscape requires not only increased budgetary allocations, but also a robust governance structure that links training needs with technological innovation, indigenous research, and a skilled workforce capable of sustaining these developments. Next, of course, is indigenous technical base, which I do not need to belabor. No doubt, DICOM has been in existence. I don't need to speak to that. But what we need to state here, of course, that the outcome from DICOM engagement is a suboptimal. I'm aware, and I've also been involved in some of the transformations that are taking place now in DICOM, and I'm hopeful that that will be sustained such that the desired objective can be reached. So also AFIT, all the things that are happening in AFIT, as well as what we now have with Nigeria, we're trying to transform the dockyard and some other establishments available, such that research and development becomes something more focused, and the result of our research and development can also give the desired input. Now, having stated these challenges that we have, what are the prospects? And again, in looking at the prospects, I will just run through, which is the fact that we already have existing platforms that we can leverage. The first, of course, being the Land Forces Simulation Center, which Nigerian Army established, which is a good platform, to be able to infuse some of the newer applications to ensure that the simulation training that takes place there can not just be improved, but of course meet the needs of the armed forces. And I think that's a good prospect that we can leverage on, meaning that there are things that are already existing which you can build upon. So also for AFIT that exists. And another a prospect that we have is the fact that our indigenous research and development platforms also valid. Now the Defense Research and Development Bureau is a platform. Of course, DICON remains one. The R&D component of DICON remains the platform that we use. Ditto for the AFIT and so on and so forth. So the proper harmonization of these platforms can help us to get to the desired state of training development that I'm speaking to in this presentation. Now, having looked at those prospects, now what are the strategies to enhance innovative training approaches and the armed forces? The strategies preferred to enhance innovative training approaches in the armed forces are training manpower development, the establishment of the Defense Training and Doctrine Coordination Committee, institution of Joint Defense Exercises Program, establishment of Defense Tech Hub, as well as reorientation of the services on the imperatives of the new approaches to training, amongst others. Now, I'm going to look at this in details, starting with training manpower development. The sophistication of emerging security challenges demands an increase in the level of manpower, both in numbers and technical proficiency. The adaptation necessary is such that proficiency in specialized fields of tactical maneuvers, as well as technical expertise in cyber-related disciplines, will need to be deployed. In this wise, the armed forces will need to broaden its recruitment base. At the primary level, the number of new recruits with relevant criteria could be increased. The secondary level could be to involve the recruitment of technical specialties, especially in the field of cyber and software engineering and other associated fields. This, of course, is to boost the technical manpower requirement of the armed forces of Nigeria. A tailored manpower development program could be evolved to take care of immediate and medium to long-term development program. And I think that these requirements are quite essential, because we really cannot afford to be left out from, the technical advancements that we see across the world. So in our case, I believe that to be able to fast-track the manpower, specialties in the armed forces, of course, a lot is being done within, but I think that to be able to fast-track it, if there are specialties that already exist, it's better to have them brought in. Pertinently, the launch of a National Military Instructor Development Program offers a targeted strategy to address the challenge of low manpower to innovation ratio in the Nigerian Armed Forces. So, this, of course, program will focus on identifying, training, and certifying military personnel across the services as subject matter experts in the specialized domains, including cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, robotics, and asymmetric warfare tactics. The program will prioritize mid-career officers and instructors, equipping them with advanced skills through both local institutions like the AFIT and, of course, international military academies. And I'm glad that we're doing that, but we need to also expand it. Why? Because it's necessary for us to be able to rub minds and to be able to see, compare notes with what happens in other parts of the world. The aim is to rapidly build a corps of qualified instructors capable of translating modern warfare innovations into operational training contexts. By professionalizing military teaching and embedding innovation into instructional competencies, the program, which I'm advocating, will directly boost the quality and scale of military training, enhancing forces adaptability and ensuring that they remain ahead of evolving threats. The Ministry of Defense, through the Defense Headquarters Training Branch, and in collaboration with the National Universities Commission, as well as Air Force Institute of Technology and international military education institutions, would be responsible for implementing the program. A centralized database of certified instructors will be created, and training milestones will be monitored using digital learning management systems. To ensure sustainability, The program will be financed through a mix of government funding, strategic defense partnership, and bilateral military training support programs. This multi-tiered approach would gradually increase the instructor base and technical proficiency within the services. Over time, the program will enable the armed forces to deliver high-impact, innovation-oriented training at scale that effectively reduces reliance on foreign expertise and strengthening institutional resilience, which also goes to deepen military professionalism and enhance the strategic autonomy of the armed forces. And I think this is something that is very essential for us to begin to pursue now. Next, of course, is establishment of a Defense Training and Doctrine Coordination Center committee, which I believe the CDS need to take special interest in this, as well as the Minister of Defense. The establishment of a Defense Training and Doctrine Coordination Committee represents a strategic solution to the challenge of fragmented strategic responsibility for training within the armed forces. This committee will serve as a centralized body composed of representatives from the Ministry of Defense, Defense Headquarters, Service Training Command, the Defense College, and other relevant security institutions. The core function of this committee will be to harmonize training strategies, doctrines, infrastructure investment, and technological innovations, and across the services. Of course, this will be under the supervision of the Chief of Defense Staff. By ensuring a unified vision and a joint operational framework for training and development, the committee will eliminate overlaps, misalignments, and let me make clear why the Minister of Defense needs to be interested in it. Is because whatever training programs that is formulated by the committee, it is for the minister to begin to think through on the funding issues. And if need be, there are some legal frameworks that need to be established, and so for to begin to think along that way and begin to align with members of the National Assembly, and of course getting the presidential support and approval in such regard. So this is the reason why, though it remains under the control of the Chief of Defense Staff, but it has to have representation of senior staff from the Ministry of Defense. And I think that this is quite clear, especially now that we have yet to implement some of the recommendations that we talked about by having to have a joint headquarter where the CDS is operating in the same location with you. That, since we are yet to get to that level, our understanding, our development, our desire for change, has not gotten to that level. In the current dispensation, the current regime, the CDS can play that role. Now, next is institution of regular joint defense exercises program. Now, in the light of the current threat regime, the place of innovative joint exercises for the armed forces cannot be overemphasized. While the operational demands have taken huge toll on field exercises in the armed forces, their benefits underscore the need for a creative approach to conducting periodic training exercises at all costs. Drones have revolutionized military training, given their versatile applications. Under varying scenarios, unmanned area platforms can undertake surveillance and reconnaissance, thereby making them indispensable tools that offer tactical advantages during training exercises. In this wise, the use of drones, simulators, artificial intelligence, and other virtual reality tools to augment the needs is very crucial. These tools enable the simulation of high-threat combat zones, urban warfare environments, and irregular battlefield conditions without the financial and logistic burden of full-scale exercises, meaning that if we're able to improve on what obtains now at the Nigerian Army Simulation Center, and of course other facilities that we have, then we can still carry out joint exercises and training without necessarily going to the field. Even though going to the field for live shows and for live outcomes remains the ultimate. But in the light of the limitations imputed by resources, I'm saying that this is a good starting point, and I think that's something that we can do. As much as it's possible, joint field exercises should be organized to further harmonize practices and skills that have been learned in classrooms under single service arrangements. Consequently, the joint force can be better equipped for enhanced team decision-making and response. Additionally, ability to appreciate battle conditions through situational awareness, target acquisition and operational planning is a huge benefit toward investing in. Incorporating real-time battlefield simulation platforms and shared command system can cultivate inter-service synchronization and boost cognitive readiness in that sense. These exercises also provide an opportunity to test and refine joint doctrines, communication protocols, and interoperability frameworks in controlled environments. Ultimately, this will position the armed forces to be more prepared for operations, increase realism in preparation for battle, whilst integrating technologies to different scenarios. Regular and technologically advanced joint exercises will not only enhance strategic cohesion, but also foster a culture of adaptability and innovation that is critical to success in modern asymmetric warfare and joint multidisciplinary operations, multinational operations. Now, the next is establishment of a tech hub. Now, I think this again is very crucial. Crucial because if we're talking about training, it is, and then innovative training is anchored on technology. So there must be a repository for data, for all the concerns that are within the country that deals on defense and security related equipment. Now, the rapid pace of technical advancement combined with the evolving complexity of security threats necessitates a proactive approach to equipment procurement and development within the armed forces. Given the unpredictable and rapidly shifting nature of modern threats, including cyber warfare, unmanned systems, unmanned area systems, and artificial intelligence, the establishment of a dedicated military tech hub is both strategic and urgent. This hub will serve as a centralized innovation ecosystem embedded with the broader military industrial complex, facilitating, of course, continuous research. Now, this is a little bit different from what is available in the DRDD. I need us to understand it. So there's a clear distinction. The mandate for DRDD certainly is going to be different from the tech order, and as we progress, you will see what it is. So now, this tech hub will be, a centralized innovation ecosystem that embeds broader military industrial complex that facilitates continuous research, prototyping, and adaptation of defense technologies. Its function will go beyond a simple development center to include predictive threat modeling, battlefield simulation, and the integration of ground use technologies in collaboration with the academia. Now, even tech startups across the country, there are so many tech startups right now that are dealing in things that have defense content. It is the tech hub that will be able to evaluate and see what is relevant to what and keep the data within the tech hub itself. Furthermore, the tech hub will serve as a national repository of all data related to the research, design, testing, and production of military-grade equipment and systems. Now, what it will do, it can also be a feeder even to DICON. It can also be a feeder to DRDB. This is, we need to understand, what this suggestion, what it seeks to achieve. This would include secure archives for schematics, performance metrics, reverse engineering efforts, and indigenous research and development initiatives. Access to this repository would be regulated and made available to certified government agencies, academic institutions, and approved private sector players to foster local innovation and deepen the country's defense manufacturing capability. Incorporating advanced data analytics and artificial intelligence-powered knowledge management systems, the Tech Hub would enable collaborative innovation and real-time updates on emerging technology that are relevant to national security. Ultimately, this initiative will serve as a catalyst for building a resilient and self-sustaining defense technological base in Nigeria in line with global trends. Earlier in the course of this presentation, talked on a few countries, where some of this have been done. Now, the next of what strategy and of course suggestion I'm bringing is the reorientation of the services on the imperatives of the new approaches to training. This is very critical. And I'm glad that the representatives of the services are here. And I think you need to take back, to the service and begin to reorient, every officer of the armed forces in this context. The whole essence, while I went into the history and evolution of our training models, why it has become, dominant with the services, is to look at how we evolved. Then, like we always say, change is what is constant. Change is constant. Any institution and establishment that fails to change, of course, certainly, run the risk of going to extinction. And it's in this context that I believe that there has to be a reorientation on issues, on the new approaches that we are now canvassing in this presentation. That the services must begin to understand that no longer can they remain within the domain, or if you like, a cocoon of some sort. I have been a part of it. And it's by virtue of the reflections that I'm now having, and then also with the some of the experiences that I've had, that I believe that this is the way to go. Because eventually, if we fail to do it, then we're going to have issues. So in every establishment, change, though an inherent part of growth and development, often meets resistance due to institutional inertia and entrenched norms. Yet, modern change management principles emphasize that for any organization, particularly security institutions like the Armed Forces of Nigeria, sustain relevance and operational effectiveness hinge on their ability to continuously evaluate, adapt, and transform internal processes. As emerging threats demand increasing agile and technologically proficient responses, the armed forces must adapt a proactive approach to reforming its training architecture. A strategic reorientation of the services on the imperatives of new training methodologies is essential. This shift should begin with targeted leadership sensitization, and I think, CDS, this is where you come in, as well as the Minister of Defense. This is where this reorientation certainly will start with you, and speaking to the minds of the senior leadership and the service chief and the senior leadership hierarchy of the armed forces, to begin to understand the importance of this new orientation. So, a strategic reorientation of the services on imperatives or new training methodologies is essential. This shift should begin with targeted leadership centralization, service-wide communication strategies, and the institutionalization of feedback mechanisms that align training reforms with frontline operational realities. I am glad that many of the things that we're now talking about, the deeper, the nitty-gritty will be touched on in the course of this presentation. And I think that we need to escalate it so that at the end of the day, we're not running in circles with both our training as well as our operational engagement, leading to recurring outcomes where, of course, it appears we have to be giving reasons for certain things happening, when actually it is the outcome as designed that we should be talking about. So this requires cultivating an adaptive mindset among personnel, where innovation, inter-service collaboration, and cross-functional competencies are viewed as integral to mission success. This reorientation must extend beyond mere awareness to a structural reordering of training priorities and curriculum. It involves recalibrating training content to include emerging domains such as cyber operations, joint multi-domain warfare, unmanned systems integration, and artificial intelligence in battlefield decision-making. The curricular design should be informed by threat intelligence, global best practices, and lessons from recent joint operations. And I'm glad that we'll be speaking to it in the course of this interaction. Moreover, a shared service approach where training facilities, simulators, and instructors are utilized across the Nigerian Army, Navy, and the Air Force. This, of course, will foster interoperability and resource optimization. The simulation center already exists in the Army, so replicating it in the Air Force and the Navy might not be necessary, especially where the requirements of those services can be met, at the Land Forces Simulation Center. So what I'm saying is here is that resources can better be channeled, for common, just establishing become common user, platforms, and then from there we're able to, save, more resources that we can deploy in other areas. Now, next, of course, and which should be the last, is equipment procurement. Now, the integration of autonomous systems across land, maritime, air, space, and cyber domains has become increasingly critical in modern warfare, where adversaries exploit multi-domain vulnerabilities to achieve strategic advantages. And I think earlier on, the CDS in his remarks, they mentioned, he asked a question. And that question, this is a part of, where the answer lies. Where adversaries, more or less appear to be routing, conventional militaries. This, of course, to some other persons who are not within the field, they can't comprehend, they can't understand. But the reality is that it is these vulnerabilities that the professional soldiers have that the modern day adversary seeks to attack. And for them, their objective is just to need to create a nuisance and to tell who cares to listen that they have made nonsense of professional forces. Once that is achieved, then they have accomplished their end state. So it is for us to understand this and to see how we can mitigate some of those gaps that we currently have. Now, as these domains evolve in contested environment, operational environment, it is imperative that the armed forces of Nigeria align equipment procurement strategies with contemporary threat dynamics. The availability of advanced platforms such as unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned ground vehicles, autonomous maritime drones, and cyber defense infrastructure is an essential for building a force capable of rapid adaptation and multi-layered response. This is very critical. Each time, you can't talk about effective training if you do not have the tools, that is the equipment with which you are going to fight. In any case, you are more proficient in training when the eventual tools that you are going to use to operate are valuable. Now, as a young officer, I recall in those days, each time we went for training conferences of this nature, we will be reminded that, and even in training establishments, in Jaji and all the institutions, they will tell us that, look, don't worry, because as kind of like we used to ask questions. Christians, they are not in the field, they are not there. I said, don't worry, that in wartime, that what governments do across the world is that there will be an emergency provision, such that the funding of the requirements of the armed forces will be optimized. And every other thing will stop, the funding of the armed forces. So the equipment you are asking for now, you get it. Today I'm retired after close to 40 years. I don't think that changed. So it is for that purpose that I believe that integral to one of our innovative training approaches that we are advocating should be, what is embedded should be equipment procurement. It should be side by side. A percentage of what you desire should be available for them to train so that the level of proficiency will be optimized in such a manner that you don't wait to train in theater. All the in-theater training that we do to be able to acclimatize to new equipment induction and all that will be eliminated. From day one, I'm glad that the CDA just talked about, the men that have been trained, the 18th strand special forces elements. But my hope is that, embedded to that training is the fact that they have the requisite equipment to operate with, so that you do not go transition from training center field into the operational theater and then begin to get acclimatized again. So this is why this equipment procurement disposition is very critical. That as we conceptualize what the future holds, what the current and the future holds in terms of training, the component, which is equipment component that will complement that training, should be available, and resourcing for it to be provided to also be available. This is exactly what I'm trying to speak to here. So Having explained that, I don't need to also continue, but to conclude by saying that the primary goal of this paper was to examine the innovative training approaches within the armed forces of Nigeria, aimed at mitigating security challenges. The paper provided a comprehensive analysis of the core issues hindering the modernization of military training, with particular emphasis on fragmented strategic responsibility for training and a low manpower to innovation ratio, amongst others. These challenges have impeded the armed forces' ability to effectively adopt advanced training technologies, harmonize training doctrines, and develop a digitally competent force. The lack of coordinated oversight has also resulted in depleted training efforts and inefficient resource allocation. Wide-limited pool of qualified instructors in emerging fields such as cyber warfare and artificial intelligence has stifled the effective integration of innovative tools to military curriculum. Despite these limitations, the armed forces possesses strong prospects for transformation, driven by existing institutions such as the Land Forces Technology Center and the increasing attention to the indigenous research and development initiatives. To address the identified challenges, this paper proposed some strategies. The first is, of course, to increase the manpower development through the instructor development, which I touched on, and to address the challenge of shortfall in qualified manpower, as well as the establishment of the training and doctrine coordinating committee, which I also touched on. And I believe that it's a central body that will harmonize training policies, doctrine and development, infrastructure investment, as well as technological innovations across the three services. Others are instituting joint defense field exercises program for the armed forces, enhancing the capacity of civilian oversight for defense training-related concerns, establishing a military tech hub, and ensuring the reorientation of the services on the imperatives of the new approaches to training, amongst others. Collectively, these strategies offer a sustainable framework for repositioning the armed forces training system to meet contemporary and future security challenges. And so, if effectively implemented, they will not only bridge the current capability gaps, but also institutionalize a culture of innovation, synergy, and professionalizing within Nigeria's defense training architecture. It is on that note that I make the following recommendations, and I believe it will be displayed on the screen. So let me once again thank you, the Minister of Defense, for staying put for this lecture, and thank you, appreciate you, Chief of Defense.